Okay, good afternoon, everyone joining us from Malaysia. We are very happy to have you here. So what we're here to talk about today is how Malaysian businesses can become compliant with local e-invoicing regulation. My name's Martin Devine, and I'm from a company called Infinite Solutions, and we are a global e-invoicing provider, and I'll be your host today. We're here to cover a number of topics during this webinar. We'll cover challenges and opportunities that the regulation brings in, the strategic benefits of becoming compliant, what an implementation looks like, and also we'll cover some of the learnings that we've gained from helping other companies in other regions as governments have rolled out this regulation. In the second half of the show, I'm going to be joined by a special guest, Andy Winthrop from A&M Tax. And Andy will be providing valuable insights on optimizing the e-invoicing process and what that means for the broader APAC region. And I'll fully introduce Andy later. For now, let me introduce my company, Infinite Solutions. We are a global e-invoicing company, and we have completed e-invoicing projects all over Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and very relevant to this call, Malaysia. We've also been accredited from the Malaysian government, and we are recognized as an official e-invoicing provider in the region. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my first guest today now. Amar is our leading e-invoicing consultant at Infinite, and Amar has been heavily involved with our Malaysian clients. People that you're going to hear about from this presentation, companies like IFCO, who are the largest food manufacturer in Malaysia, and also Lulu, one of the large hypermarkets there. He also brings a wealth of experience from his experience of helping other companies in other geographies like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Maldives, Poland, places like that. Now, I know you're going to have a lot of questions during this presentation. What I recommend you do is you just want to put them in the chat. I'll either interrupt Amar as he's speaking, or at the very end, I'll put them all to him then. But so please message the chat, and you can also message me privately if you want to submit some questions privately. Without further ado, Amar, good afternoon, and please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Hello, everyone. My name is Amar, as Martin introduced. I carry vast experience when it comes to the global e-invoicing movements. As probably some of you have heard, when it comes to e-invoicing, is a global movement where different countries has decided to take the digitalizations or digital transformations when it comes to e-invoicing forward. Perhaps you have heard the news in Indonesia or in Singapore or in different parts of regions, which it will also be covered by our guest speaker at the end of the webinar. So to start with, I will be introducing Infinite IT Solution, who we are and what we're doing quickly, and then moving to the e-invoicing and what is e-invoicing, and secondly, what is Open People Standard, as a just brief introduction, since Malaysian e-invoicing is heavily promoting the Open People Standard to be compliant with the taxpayers in the Malaysian in Malaysia, and then moving to the requirements, the functional and non-functional requirements, and cover. We have prepared some different scenarios that we find it interesting. For example, prepayments, or if you are a retailer, or you are a mobile application, e-commerces, how to deal and how to get compliance in an efficient way and also a faster way. Also, there are some scenarios like mobile applications. So if you are a mobile application owners as well, and the business operated through an online applications, we cover in these different scenarios as well. So we try to come up with the live scenarios and how these can be covered becoming compliant with the Malaysia regulations and standards and so on. So Infinite, which is Martin and I from, is a global e-invoicing solution providers covering all over the globe when it comes to e-invoicing regulations. As I mentioned, whenever there is an invoicing regulations has been introduced, Infinite has their experts involved, getting compliant with the government standard in an efficient way around the globe. We've been in the market for over 20 years. Our main vision is the paperless solutions, which is to digitalize different documents within the organization, which is invoice. So what is e-invoicing? There is a misassumption going on e-invoicing. It's not that to get it as a PDF, not printed paper. It's not that way. It is being in a format, a digital format or a standard format that is going to be um, agreed by the party or the second buyer. This could be an e-invoicing is not just a government standard, but it could be agreed between two different companies to exchange in a certain format way. And this format is what we've seen is in common is through two different formats, whether XML and JSON. And based on our global experience, many countries select one only format, but when it comes to Malaysia, which is very important for you to know, both formats are available for you. So if you wanted to send invoices in an XML format or in a JSON format, is both standard has been published and both is acceptable by Malaysian government. So this is what is invoicing. And now looking into the benefit behind e-invoicing is not just a government regulations, but it's rather also helping your businesses to achieve to eliminate manual processes, because you could actually thus invoicing regulations and, and e-invoicing reconciliations digitally through a digital tools, since you are able to accept invoices digitally from your seller actually on that perspective. And but on the other hand, this is for large companies when it comes to reconciliation. Today, if you're receiving invoices in hundreds per day, you don't want to have manual processes of data entry and so on. And e-invoicing coming here could help your businesses. So it's not just only looking into it. We have seen this a lot of companies that look into it from only a perspective of getting compliant with the government standards. So it is also could benefit your businesses in some aspects. For small companies, you could actually easily within one click generate a report of your monthly tax, or getting your perhaps the reconciliations reports in different ways, because invoices has become digital to you. And thanks to the Malaysian government, the portal has many access and many features to generate this kind of reports. So it keeps you up to date with your informations and what has been produced so far. So this is from a standard point of getting compliant and also benefits from the e-invoicing part. Now, perhaps you have seen an Open PEPL standard, Malaysian's Open PEPL standard. What is all about? It is an accredited standard way that has been published, and Infinite has been part of this group for many years now. And the PEPL standard has been modified based on the country's needs. So Malaysians has taken the accreditation and the standards of PEPL and has been modified based on the need and the specifications. And we will be talking about it in the coming slides, where it is a common standard. The buyer and the sellers need to be, and the governments, all of them, three of them agreed on this particular standard. And the exchange of these invoices would be on that particular, it's called data automation, or EDI, electronic data interchanging mechanism. And all eventually all the companies and taxpayers in Malaysia should be adopting to this particular standard, whether it's directly or through a service providers like us. And as I mentioned, Infinite has been an open people accredited for many years, being knowing the in and out of the open people standards and so on. So this is the first aspect of the key framework of Malaysian's government standards. The second one, the invoice content itself. It is not about integrations between your system to the government, but it's also is about the invoice content. So the invoice content itself, it's mandatory. It has a mandatory fields that will be when it comes to the mandatory fields. Even we will dive into more details. What are the technical requirements and non-technical requirements out of it in the coming? But also, so the third part is to be only mandatory for the taxpayers part of it, yeah. And of course, data retentions is one of the main part that you have to look into it from an analysis point of view, where you're going to store your data, and at the same time, archiving is also part of it. So first, integrations. Second, getting to know the mandatory content. Third is where the data retention, which is to achieve in terms of security. Today, the government does not want to integrate with you if you're not achieving some certain data retentions or security features and so on. And as I said, the last one is the archiving part of it. Yeah. So this is a general scope, an introduction. What we have covered here? What is open people? As I mentioned, it's an international standard that is being optimized by many countries. Any country has its own modification on this standard to achieve the maximum quality way of seamlessly exchanging invoicing in a standard way. We also covered the introductions part of the 5 key elements, which is also we'll be getting into more details about it in the coming slides. Now, when it comes to timelines, actually, any government, when it comes to Malaysia, they have only 3 phases. Yeah, we have seen many countries has implemented with multiple phases, actually, more than 3, but Malaysia decided to go with 3 phases. And the first phase is to start on August, 1st of August, to be compliant with the government standard. And that's if you are a taxpayer who's having more than 100 million when it comes to your last year revenue. So it is all based on your last year revenue. If you have achieved 100 million, so it's your duty to be compliant with the government standard in the coming August, which is quite nearby, around the corner, to be compliant with the government on the first stage. Yeah. This is the main slide of our presentation today, which is the architectures of the My Invoice portal, and which Malaysian government called it the 4 corners module. The 4 corners modules, you have 2 sides of the modules. One side is, which is the topmost side here, it is related to the government part. And then the one in blue down there, it's related to whether to the taxpayers or the sellers. So it's taxpayer, whether you could be a supplier or a buyer, that would be your part of the interaction of this module. Yes. The 4 corners modules has, as I mentioned, first the buyer part, second is the government, third is the seller, actually, and then the fourth one, it would be service providers like us. Yeah. So the service providers also has taken a part of the Malaysian's government standard. However, it is absolutely optional over here to involve or to have to adopt to these 4 corners model. So you could adopt to the second to the 2 corners model. You don't need to, or the 3 corners model, basically, where only could be seller, government, buyer, without involving the register of the open people. However, that the government has been encouraging companies, taxpayers to adopt to the four corners model, because this is um, large organizations would benefit of the e-invoicing over here, since you are able to exchange e-invoicing electronically from one point to another with no human intervention. And if you missed any of the corner of the open people, then you need to send actually the invoice manually to your to your the supplier, to the supplier via email, or you can print it out and give it to them, which is again, the government has benefited from it from standard digitalization point, but you as the taxpayers, you haven't benefited. So it is very recommended by the Malaysian government to achieve the four corners model, involve a service provider, involve an open people service providers to cover and to be able to get compliance and share invoices from one point to another. Now, to get into further details on the processes, yeah. So you can see the first one is issuing an invoice. So basically, whenever there is a transactions happens on your system, it must be instantly you issued an instant. There is a sale, an instant invoice should be issued, and at the same time, an instant that particular invoice must be sent to the government. So the government will not tolerate any particular action of sending invoices after, let's say, a 1 hour of issuing invoice, unless of course there is here and there systems down. The government understand all this perspective. However, you issued an invoice, your system is functional, you must send it straight away to the government for validations purposes. Yes, which is the second step comes to the picture when it comes to the government standard. So validations would must be happens on the live, yes, and through a particular standard. We will be discussing the technicalities in the coming slide in a brief way. The integrations with your system must be integrated with the government. You must be sharing your invoice instantly, as I mentioned. This is for finance mostly, not IT. The regulations part here, and for IT, you must have the integrations part for the validations purpose. So invoice has been shared with the government. There is a sale happen. Invoice has been shared with the government. The third parties, the government will validate. After validations, will send notification to the buyer and seller that this your invoice, we assumed here your invoice has been correct, has been validated correctly. Of course, we will be discussing more on the QR code will be generated over here to send that particular response to the buyer. So notification will be, how notification will happen. Notifications are in two ways. One is through the API, which is the digital way. The second one will the buyer or the sellers will see the notification on the My Invoice portal. So many get confused that this particular notification could be via email or via SMS over here, but this notification will be shown, you will be see it on the portal once you log into your portal as a taxpayer, whether you are a seller or you are a buyer. When for the sharing, as I mentioned, the QR code is a very important part of the validations. So you are actually receiving the QR code on digital way. And this QR code is a way of verifications for any particular, for the buyers, actually, to verify this invoice has been 100% sent to the government, as I mentioned, and so on. On a fifth front, this is a feature which we will be covering. You have some certain period of time where you can actually cancel your invoice. You can cancel your invoice whether you are a buyer by requesting it, or as a seller, supplier. Basically, you can cancel your own invoice basically without issuing a credit note, which is a very good feature. We find many countries are not supporting this kind of flexibility. If you shared it with the government, you validated it, you must issue a credit note. You cannot cancel an invoice, which is thanks to the Malaysian government again has actually issued this kind of flexibility, changing a little bit here and there in the open paper standard to match the country's needs and so on. And the sixth one, the supplier and the buyer actually can obtain the summary of your all transactions. This is one of the features that I've mentioned previously. You can, with one click from the My Invoice portal, download. If you are a small mid enterprise companies, perhaps you wouldn't have these kind of features. Here is on the portal, easy for reconciliations and tracking purposes and so on. So that is in a brief way the main point of the My Invoice portals. Now, just discussing a little bit more on the what I have mentioned, yes, in terms of the pre-submissions, who is is certain to do the pre-submissions. If you have to check first if whether you are a taxpayer, and then second, after being a taxpayer, you are actually going to have on this, you fall on this particular phase, yeah, and we will be discussing in more details basically in the coming slides, or even if you are not falling in the phase of the government, your buyer could also request for a digital invoice based on the government standard, and you must comply. So if your buyer requested this, we'll discuss in more details. So you make sure that your invoice being created instantly. If there is a cell, there is no delay over here, which is called temporary resistance. Your invoice, your system must be temporary resistant. There is no changes on the invoice. If there is an invoice being issued in your system, you must share it straight away to the governments, and it must be digitalized. And then there is a validation that's mentioned, notifications, more details, and so on about it. Yes. So when it comes to the, as I mentioned, the rejections and then the storing is important factors that you must comply as well. And then, of course, the Malaysian government supporting you with the reporting feature on the My Invoice portal over there. Yeah. To move on quickly on the regulation side of it. So if you are, where to start? Basically, I mean, you are fresh, you just got to know about the Malaysians e-invoicing requirements. Where to start is first to register on My Invoice portal. To register, being, even if you are a voluntarily wanted to get compliant, there is this kind of feature that is already a beta API is being published. You can integrate with, you can actually register to be compliant ahead with your with your company ahead of others. So it is not absolutely shouldn't be falling in the faces. So you can also be ahead of, as I mentioned, ahead and get registered and also confirm with the buyers. So as I mentioned previously, your buyer can request a compliant invoice with the Malaysian standard. So it's not only that the you will be waiting for the phases. Let's say that we've seen some cases in some other countries, especially retailers, large retailers, they enforce all their suppliers to send them an invoicing compliant. We've seen this in several countries in Asia and around Europe. And even though those particular suppliers are not yet on the face of the government or not yet mandated by the government to be compliant. So also this is very important. Note that your buyer can ask you, send me a digital invoice, and I wouldn't pay you unless you send me the digital invoice based on the digital government standard. So you must comply at that point based on the government standard recommendations and so on, and then later on, if there is any dispute, the payer actually would win this part of it. So if there is any invoice being issued, as mentioned, compliance parts, you must be sent it to the government with their standard way. Now we have two kind of scenarios over here. You need to know yourself whether you are compliant with the government standard. You have to ask yourself two questions. Is there any of your buyers actually asking of mandatory invoicing? Am I on the this particular phase? If yes, any of these questions, the answer is yes. So you must get compliant following, the first part of it. If the answer is no for those two questions, none of your actually buyers are requesting to be sending a digital invoice, or you are not on this particular phase. So you can actually move ahead and issue a normal invoice based on the current ongoing submission. Yes, and so on. Moving on to
Hi,
the
Amar. Amar, do you mind
yes.
if I just jump in there? So really, really interesting stuff so far. We've got a question in the chat, and also I've been messaged a few times as well. People are asking for copies of the slides. Can you send us a copy? Different variations of that question. People may be aware at the top of our screen, there's actually a button that says download the Malaysian e-invoicing guide. We will send the slides, but we have this slides plus a ton more content on Malaysian ebooks, how-to guides, benefits, things like that. If you click download here and just enter your details, we're going to send you these slides plus a ton of extra content. Please just remember to put your corporate email address in there, and I'll also give a reminder of this at the end. But yeah, put your details in there. You'll get these slides plus a lot more. Thank you, Omar.
Yes, some of the questions also were you dialing from different countries, Singapore, here and there, and connecting from Dubai and different parts. Um, so yeah, part of thank you, Martin, for answering these questions and diving into more details when it comes to the requirements. Basically, in this guidebook, where which we would be sharing with you once you click on the button and register your details and corporate address and details, you will be getting this guidebook, which is summarize one of the mandatory fields. As I mentioned, it's not only about integrating with another system, but it's also to follow the requirements of the mandatory fields. And of course, we wouldn't be getting one by one, but here is the summary of all the mandatory fields and explanations about it. And also important features is the B2B and the B2C side. But what we felt is important for you to know, there are some certain scenarios that has a special cases or an additional fields. So this scenarios, for example, when it comes to the shipping part, shipping, you need to add some extra details, especially if you deal with customs. Some of our recent customers in Malaysia, they deal with the customs, the export and import. So we have added these features on this particular part. There is an optional fields. These optional fields, it's not mandated by the government. However, the taxpayers may want it to use it for his internal purposes and details. So this set of options can the payment terms can be included as well in the invoice. So and can be sent also to the government. The government will not look into it when it comes to validations. The government only look into the mandatory fields, which is the different type of invoices. Also, when it comes to the different type of invoice, let me go back to the previous slides. As you can see here, there is invoice invoice type, yeah, e-invoice type. This is also it's important for you to know the e-invoicing in Malaysia is not only about credit. We used to credit debit note and tax or simplified tax invoice, but also there is a type of refund invoice. So refund invoice and as an additional type of refund could be refund tax invoice or refund debit and credit note also. It's all mandatory fields out here. So just for you importance, the refund, the refund, the difference between the credit invoice or the refund invoice, you're refunding the whole amount, but the credit note, you're adjusting here and there when it comes to the invoice itself. Yes. So that is an additional part when it comes to the invoice types. Yeah. Now, moving into interesting details, as I mentioned previously, there is 72 hours from the day you issued the invoice, from the time you issued the invoice, you have 72 hours, which many countries is not supporting this feature. You have 72 hours to cancel the invoice without issuing a refund or without issuing a credit note to this particular invoice. So your buyer could, the supplier and the buyer both could cancel the invoice. The buyer, of course, would request to the supplier saying that through my invoice portal, by the way, can be requested, or maybe a normal notifications can be requested as well. But the official way through the my invoice portal, you can request to cancel particular invoice you see is not correct, and then there is no absolutely credit note or refund invoice will be issued against that particular invoice. So that is an interesting factor. Let's say if we have exceeded this 72 hours, you must issue a credit note or refund invoice here. So there is no way you can cancel. This is very strict rules here. There is no way you can just cancel the invoice and move on with the refunding part. Yeah. So back to the close to the end when it comes to the regulations, what we've covered, the introduction on the e-invoicing and open people. You don't need to adapt to the four corners models. You can adapt only to the three corners. You, the supplier, the government, the buyers. There is the mandatory fields that we have covered, the main part of it. Before that, I just wanted to summarize this part. You always should start when you wanted to get compliant with the government. You always should start. You decided to outsource it, which is based on the evaluation that you will do it internally, whether it's outsourced or an internal part, internal IT teams. This is a very sensitive topic. You're dealing with the government over here. There is many mandatory fields. There is regulations in place you could benefit from. You don't have the deep knowledge, so we advise you straight away contact the service providers to outsource this. If you felt that your employees has digested the knowledge of implementing it internally, so you just move ahead on the first step. When it comes to implementation plan, always start with the mandatory fields. Don't think of the API, don't think of the integrations, don't think of the temporary system. Always check if all the mandatory fields are there in your invoice and you are able to capture it, which is the list of based on the scenarios. So list down the scenarios, and the scenarios is not like a credit debit note or tax invoice or refund invoice. These are not only the scenarios. There are scenarios where you have a discount on item levels, a discount on the total invoice, or you have a voucher, or you have a different type of payment. So you have to list down what type of invoices. As I mentioned, the type of invoice over here is not about credit debit and tax invoice and refund. No, but you could have a tax invoice with a discount on an item level, or a discount on a total invoice, or you will have for export type of invoice. Yeah, it's still a tax invoice, but you have it for export and so on. So you list down these particular type of invoices. You sit down on the mandatory fields, checking it one by one if you have made the mandatory data fields. Now, this is practice done. It becomes the IT part. The IT jumped in. There is a whole documentations out there for the API integrations. Pretty straightforward. You can have it integrated, and then you're able to capture these details. You change it to JSON or XML. However, you are not benefiting a lot. Why? Because you did not achieve the four corners module. You still need to send invoices manually to your basically to the buyer's details and so on. And then involving service providers whose open people standard, which it will have a register with the government that able to send invoices digitally to the register of that particular customer with no human intervention. So this is, you have achieved the full benefits out of e-invoicing from a digital transformations point of view and the government standard point of view, which is important here. Now, the end of the we're reaching the end of the our slides here. When it comes to the storage, actually, where should I store your invoices? Is it on the cloud? Is it on premise? We've seen some regulations here and there, but however, for Malaysians e-invoicing, it's absolutely okay to share or to have a storage of your invoices on the cloud or on premise. And the advisable way is for 7 years period of time, so that this must be archived and for the advisable way, yeah. So it's not being 100% mentioned. Listen, it's mandatory for you to archive for 7 years. No, it is mentioned as an advisable way to archive your invoices for 7 years. Now, as I mentioned, this is when it comes to the regulations, introductions, what you need to achieve here and there. We do have brought to you today some scenarios that would fall in to one of the scenarios could be applicable for you from your end, the advance payment and the prepayment scenarios part. Just to move on quickly on this part, all of the scenarios that we have, it's falling the 5 points that we've mentioned. You must be integrated with the government. You must be able to produce an invoice with the compliance requirements. Your system must be able to share the invoices instantly, and then you able to receive also the QR code from the government and able to actually print out this QR code on your particular PDF if you want to share it with the government or with your buyer. And at the same time, you can also share invoices, by the way, in an XML to your buyers to achieve, which is at that time you will be achieving the four corners model, which is preferably to achieve by service providers. Now, looking into these diagrams here, as I mentioned, you have the suppliers and the buyers, and then there is the different corners of the IRPMs, clouds, and the data responsible from the validations point of view. And as the prepayment and advance payment, it is the difference from it and a tax and a normal tax invoice. The mandatory fields, basically. It's not that you're changing all this, even if you have a discount invoice, if you have different type of export invoice as well. So these type of invoices are there, different type. However, the difference would not fall into these 5 steps that we've mentioned. The difference only would be on the mandatory fields. So you go back to the list, what mandatory fields for the prepayment and advance payment is completely different than, which is at the, I mean, you will add an additional fields and so on and so forth, you know. It's one or between 1 and 5 mandatory fields that you must add it. Also, maybe you have a supply period, you know, time. Let's say, especially this for fuel companies, they have contracts. You have a monthly billing for a period of supplying. You know, you have an invoice issued on this date, a summary invoice, basically. So these summary invoices, it's also all of them, all of the different type. You have to understand you're not changing your way of processing invoice. However, only you are adding extra fields here and there for your different type of invoices: prepayment, export invoice, refund invoice, credit, debit note. So the process is the same as you can see here on the screen, is the communications as mentioned. So, but this is the same what we've mentioned actually. We'll jump into the second scenarios. This is for e-commerces, and let's say the e-commerce platform here is Photobook Malaysia, for example, and then you have the merchant, and you have the purchaser and the suppliers in terms of logistics part. There are, if you are an e-commerce, there are two different type of e-commerces. So you have whether it's super app where or marketplace. Basically, you have the merchant, the buyer and the supplier both in your super app or your super e-commerce marketplace, like Lazada or Zalora or different this part. So the actually the suppliers, there are two different type of invoices over here. Whether you issue a self-built invoice, means you are issue yourself an invoice on behalf of your supplier in order for you to process this particular supplier to the buyer. Yeah. So this is when it comes, if the goods is not owned by you, this is one option. The second option is that if the goods is owned by a particular suppliers, the supplier is still having the goods, so the invoice must be issued by the supplier itself. Yeah. There is no way that you can issue an invoice on behalf of the suppliers and so on. It's either to have it as a self-paid, built invoice, which is, this is how you're going to bill yourself on the goods of others and then process it to the purchaser. If you own the goods, you are an e-commerce, like Photobook, for example. It has its own industry, it has its own goods, so you can issue the invoice itself. You are from the e-commerce itself. It's not a super app like the different Shein or different e-commerce, so that you can issue the invoice. You own the goods, you issue the invoice itself, which is thought that to open an eye where again the process is the same. However, who issues the invoice is really important when it comes to e-commerces, and you have to understand, as mentioned over here, the role and responsibility for each one. Buyer, which is the merchant, the you own the good, whether you are the owner of this particular good, you have to understand first who issues the invoices. It's really important. It's not just getting compliant with the technicalities and you have achieved it and here and there. So it's also part of it. So moving on quickly to the this more detail that you find it beneficial on the download books once you download it. But when it comes to the second standard, whether you are a petrol stations or mobile applications, you find this graph. It's really important, where who issues the invoices again, in terms of buyers, and the sellers on the different side of it. And this is mostly when it comes to the B2C perspective. Yes, we covered a lot about the B2B because this is what the Malaysian standard started with. But when it comes to the B2C, is also you have to note that this later on is going, it's going to be through an offline validations part. So because POS's petrol station could have a weak internet connectivity, it will be more towards the reporting. So B2C is called reporting. You be compliant with the government standard on the POS machine. You issue B2C invoice and so on. However, it is a reporting mechanism rather than the B2B. We're focusing on the B2B, and this is what the government is focusing on over here. It is less than 2 seconds. In fact, during our testing with the government, it's achieved less than milliseconds. In fact, less than half of seconds that the government how response and quality of technology over here. If an invoice being sent for validation, it's just taking less than seconds to be achieved. So petrol stations, you can see the buyers coming in, basically full or built a gas, and then the requirements of the tax from the particular POS or the particular machine on the petrol stations must be getting the compliance standard itself with the signatures within the offline modules over there in that particular petrol stations, and then later on would be reporting part of it and so on. So moving on to the retailers part. So basically, it's a real-time validations, as I mentioned. You connect it with the My Invoice portal. You can be able to download the invoice. You can within the real-time transaction and so on. So giving more details over here. We just discussed it previously, but I want to jump on the if you are a retailer, yeah. So you also have a lot of we do have a lot of experience when it comes to the retailers in the retailer sectors, and we have customers in Malaysia for that. It's basically straightforward. Your POSs must be adding all the details you have. Particular must be able to work offline as well for the B2C module in our offline feature. And offline tool can be sitting on the server or can be sitting on the POS itself, depending on your current module of the store. So because sometimes there's 3-4 different POSs connected to one server on the store, or maybe a small shop where there is only one POS. So this tool can be installed within the POS itself. So this is, but from a standard compliance point, this is not has nothing to do with Infinite here or Infinite solutions. But this is how you the best practices is, and which is Infinite is following these best practices. And you will find this diagram as well, just to skip the time. You find this diagram in the slides and the guidebook. You can download it on top there to read on more details about it. But this is the last point, and on my webinar, on my part, which is what Infinite does provide. If again, let's say if you have wanted to select the service providers, we are happy to help. We have been accredited of Open People, and we have been working as a global e-invoicing provider. So let's say you have a branch in Indonesia or Singapore, you'll find Andy, me, and Martin and the team supporting you in different e-invoicing regulations globally. It's not just Malaysian e-invoicing. And then from a B2B, as you can see, this is our modules. Basically, integration is smooth, can be integrated with any kind of ERP or accounting system. We have been compliant with our Oracle partners or Microsoft partners or NetSuite partners, with all getting involved. Integration's been done. What is I don't want to mention in details about the compliance because we already mentioned, but why Infinite and why this particular? Because the validation engine will be sitting based on the government rule standard, sitting locally for you, validate invoices before sharing it with the government. So basically, this is a beneficial part of you of the solutions, that your invoices will be in a real-time validations. So back to you, Andy. Martin, sorry. Thank you for listening, and back to Mr. Martin and Andy to cover the finance part.
Thank you very, very much, Amar. Just before you change the screen, Amar, again, a few people have messaged me about the slides, the content, and some additional questions. Just to remind people, at the top of Amar's screen, there is a link that says download the Malaysian e-invoicing guide. If you're interested in the slides and the guidebook on what a successful implementation looks like and how to keep your business compliant, there's a ton of content there. Please just click the link, sign in with your corporate email address, and that will get sent to you. Now, I'm really, really looking forward to handing over to Andy. There's 2 questions that's come in as well, Amar, that I wanted to run by you before we hand over to Andy. Non-profit organizations such as residents association, do they need to follow the same process as enterprises?
Yeah, Andy is more on your side here from the regulation standpoint.
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer that. Look, in terms of who actually has to prepare e-invoices, an association is included. So there are specific exclusions in the in the regulations, but they're more linked to government authorities versus associations. So the answer is yes.
Very good. And then one more, Andy, that I think, and I'm going to introduce you in a second, but what about independent consultants? Do they need to comply with the same regulations?
Yes, any individual running a business will still have to comply, but based on revenue threshold, revenue turnover, it's likely that you may be within the 1st of January go live date or the 1st of July go live date in 2025. So there's a bit of time to prepare for this.
Okie doke. Andy, thank you. What an introduction. So who is this new gentleman that's joined us? This is Andy Winthrop, and Andy is from A&M Tax. Now, as you probably just gathered, he specializes in indirect tax, assisting multinationals on VAT, customs and global trade compliance issues in international restructuring projects across the APAC region. Andy has over 16 years experience working across Australia, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and advising. What he does is he advises on the establishment of regional and global supply chain structures around different headquarters and procurement locations in various industries such as consumer products, life sciences, mining, and metals. Andy, I really appreciate you joining us today. I'm going to give you the floor now, and we're looking forward to hearing your involvement.
Fantastic. Martin, can you help me? I'm just trying to share my slides. I know they've been uploaded, but perhaps just while I provide a brief introduction of myself, Martin, if you could help me with that.
Well, I will absolutely do that.
Fantastic. Thank you. So in short, good morning, everyone. I know we've got 5 minutes till midday in KL. Lovely to have this opportunity to present. My name is Andy Winthrop. I'm the indirect tax leader here at Alvarez & Marsal for Asia. Prior to joining A&M, I was a partner at EY, where my responsibilities were to design and implement automated indirect tax returns, as well as e-invoicing solutions across Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Taiwan, and Australia. And what I wanted to present today was some of my observations of the impending e-invoice regime for Malaysia. In particular, how does it compare and contrast to other markets in APAC? I also wanted to go through what are some of the business factors that are implicated as part of the e-invoicing process. So in other words, there's e-invoicing solutions, there's tax, but what else do clients need to think about before sharing some operationally or strategies on operationalizing e-invoicing and finally sharing some updates across the region. So in terms of the e-invoicing regime in Malaysia, it is a key aspect of the Ministry of Finance initiative to digitize tax administration. And what I find interesting is e-invoicing typically has a link to indirect taxes, VAT, GST, SST, because of its transactional nature and often the link to indirect tax returns. Now, for Malaysia, the e-invoicing regime has actually been codified within income tax law and is being administered by the IRBM, which is the authority that focuses on direct taxes, income taxes, versus Royal Malaysia Customs, who looks at SST and customs duties in Malaysia. So this clearly signifies that this is the first step towards broader digitization of taxes in Malaysia. So it's really interesting to see Malaysia taking that first step compared to many of its counterparts in the region. But I've got a few observations that I've selected just to compare with other markets. So the data upload and validation, Amara kindly spoke about this. You've got API or My Invoice options. What I think is critical to understand is more so the nature of the business versus the tax footprint, which is going to be the driver of whether or not a taxpayer or business decides to use API versus the My Invoice portal. simply because an API will assist if you've got voluminous transactions, whereas manually uploading or having an individual responsible for interacting with the My Invoice portal is likely going to suit those who have less voluminous transactions. In terms of data transformation, Amar has already spoken about that, so perhaps I can move on to the reporting and dashboards element. The IRBM is going to be providing dashboards that allow further insights into your transactional data. When I ask my clients how much SST they have under management, what does their indirect tax profile look like in Malaysia, it's very difficult for people to articulate or outline that. ERPs like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, very good at collecting data, not always as effective of reporting data in a manner that's helpful for, say, tax or business decisions. So these dashboards will allow finance and tax operatives to better understand transactional nature of business. So I think that's quite helpful there. Data retention and security will matter particularly for GLCs or GLC-linked entities because of the requirements to keep data within Malaysia. So whether it's on the cloud or whether it's physically stored, that data needs to remain in Malaysia for these types of entities. So something to think about there. And then we've obviously got the time periods around rejections or cancellation of invoices. Again, Amar has spoken clearly on this, so perhaps allow us to move on. I've got a summary here of some of the aspects that affect an e-invoicing project. A lot of my clients ask me, is e-invoicing a tax-driven project? Is it IT? Is it even procurement? Realistically, the answer depends on your overall strategy. Are you going to use e-invoicing to perhaps create efficiencies around procure to pay or order to cash, or are you going to use it as a means to an end? There's a compliance requirement that you need to fulfill. Either way, based on my experience, these are the 4 areas of the business that are going to be impacted by the Malaysia e-invoicing regime. So the first is tax. Obviously, there's data points. There's not going to be a huge shift immediately on the way that you prepare your SST returns, but the IRBM will have more data than ever. In fact, typically it's Royal Malaysia Customs that has your data around, say, imports. Now we're going to see a lot more communication between these bodies because some of the information collected, say, for transactional purposes may be different to what is recorded for customs purposes, especially when you're looking at things like TP, transfer pricing, versus customs value at the border, which still needs e-invoicing to account for. So a lot of clients are now thinking about tax governance, building in tax governance policies, tax governance solutions to ensure that their data integrity is maximized at the same time that they implement e-invoicing, because data is key. We've also got process areas, right? So which function of the business is going to be affected by e-invoicing? There's obvious ones like IT, tax, finance. But if you look at the overall process or the touch points of e-invoicing, it does include things like procurement, purchasing, logistics even. Many other functions within the entity needs to have awareness of what's happening with e-invoicing, how the e-invoicing solution has been implemented. So in my experience, early engagement is key here, right? We need to involve the right stakeholders earlier in the process so that they are aware and they can provide relevant feedback, right? There's also a technology or technical aspect that drives success of these projects. If you look at Malaysia, again, it's quite unique. It's got an SST regime, Singapore GST, Indonesia VAT, other areas of ASEAN and North Asia VAT. So ERP systems and accounting systems are set up specifically for SST and, for that matter, Bahasa. So how are we going to implement an e-invoicing solution in Malaysia that can be rolled out, say, to Singapore when they go live, Philippines already live, Indonesia also considering, right? Do we need to have our ERP systems that are compliant and consistent across these markets? And finally, to an earlier point I raised around, what is the best way to implement, or what are some of the thought processes around strategy for e-invoicing? It can be a juncture that clients think about procure to pay processes, other process efficiencies. Many of these have been publicized by the IRBM as part of the reason for implementing e-invoicing. But I think for those taxpayers, for clients who are yet to make the decision about how they want to integrate e-invoicing into their environment, I think it's a chance to take a step back and consider what else can be improved for our business in a way that actually brings about process efficiency, perhaps even tax efficiency or tax data integrity as part of the overall e-invoicing solution. So if we've got the ideas of what areas of business is going to be impacted, we can start to think about how do we operationalize our e-invoicing solution. If it's working with Infinite, how do we incorporate e-invoicing into our IT environment, our systems environment, our process environment? And I've got a few factors here that I've observed come up when clients or taxpayers are thinking about how they want to operationalize e-invoicing. And I won't go through all of them, but I did want to pick a few that you'll see come up as common themes in the next few slides. So things like in-house capability, that's not just the number of resources that we may have in tax, finance, IT. It's also the ability to keep on top of regulations, keep on top of legislative changes. For Malaysia, we've had updates to the regulation as recent as a month ago. These regulations were only released the end of last year. We've had multiple updates. We've got 3 different tranches going live for e-invoicing. How do we stay adept to the changes in regulations that will no doubt happen, right? Do we have the capacity, the bandwidth, the resources to do that from a human capital perspective, besides for the fact of systems and IT infrastructure? Do we have to invest to create our own solutions, be they API or some other e-invoice associated technology? Commonality is another one that's key. Malaysia is part of the first cab off the rank if you think about it. I know that markets like Korea have been live for many years. Philippines also announced that they were going live before Malaysia. But in terms of sophistication, really Malaysia is one of the first. Singapore's going to follow. Australia may build in the B2C transactions. So we need to start to think about commonality. How do we maybe use Malaysia as the test case to roll out our e-invoicing solution around the region, if not the globe? I also wanted to then talk about documentation flow, because when we've got data being shared with the IRBM and by proxy Royal Malaysia Customs, we need to make sure that we've got a process that enables us to maintain and support our transactional history. So we need the documents to justify our tax and business decisions that have been made, and that can impact the way that we operationalize e-invoicing. Now, I've got 3 key strategies that I have seen in the market about how people do go about operationalizing it. And that is in-housing, co-sourcing, and outsourcing. Right? And I'll go through these now. So they're not in any particular order here, right? These are just in terms of what people can consider. In-housing or in-sourcing, in my mind, this is quite rare. I've only seen a handful at best clients, industry participants decide to completely in-house their solution. That's perhaps build a solution, maintain the solution, implement the solution, and monitor regulations. There's a key benefit that there's no dependence on external service providers, right? But you can see that the considerations that you need to make in terms of responsibilities, capabilities, resource availability, it can start to really outweigh the benefits that you have here of overall governance and control. In my experience, I've only ever seen very large corporations attempt an in-housing model. So it's there for awareness, but I really don't see this as a common way that people approach e-invoicing. On the other hand, you've got co-sourcing, right? Where effectively the competitive advantages of an in-house provider or the company compared with external advisors get to be relied upon. So the business knows the business best. So the business knows the data sources, the nature of that data, the nature of the business, and that can be relied upon to build certain activities and responsibilities relating to the implementation of e-invoicing. So basically responsibilities are shared. You can see that I've highlighted certain responsibilities that can be shared between advisors or clients below, but that can be fixed according to a tailored outcome, right? So this just demonstrates that if you want the most tailored approach, if you still want to have an element of control, the co-sourcing model where you're relying on some internal resources but also external resources, that can be quite a compelling business argument or business case for change within the organization. And finally, we've got a complete outsource model. Now, that involves a higher spend, but what it does do, particularly if there are resource constraints within the organization, it allows resources to focus on what they do best, running the business, while your external consultants, whether it be an e-invoicing provider or a consultant, advisor to assist with implementation, all of this can work together to get a most effective outcome from a industry expertise. Leave it to the professionals who see it day to day. Again, there's costs involved there. So conscious of time, let me move on now to the final couple of messages around what are we seeing throughout APAC. You may be aware Singapore only 3 weeks ago announced that they're now going to implement e-invoicing for new GST registrants. That's starting in November next year with voluntary registration allowed before that. No doubt the IRAS is going to roll out e-invoicing throughout all of taxpayers within Singapore. So whilst it starts with new registrations, it will certainly be rolled out across the board. We've also seen the Philippines, they've gone live, but unfortunately there's been some challenges around the tax authorities' modules, and they're slowly onboarding taxpayers 100 by 100 at a time. So rather slow implementation, but they have focused on going live and they will go live. They're not going to cut that initiative. And they follow a process that's very similar to South Korea because the South Korea government actually funded the Philippines initiative on e-invoicing. China has extended their e-invoicing pilot to all provinces. Interestingly, in China, they're going to have select e-invoicing providers, select advisors that you can use. It's still very much controlled by the tax authorities and government authorities, but everything's going to be e-invoicing based. Australia is live on business to government. New Zealand has changed valid tax invoices, so no needs to be paper-based. Your tax invoice can be data-based, which is the first step to digitization and e-invoicing. And then you've got Japan, who's announced last year and has already implemented a qualified invoicing rule. That in itself is not actually an e-invoice. What it has set is the parameters of what needs to be contained in a valid tax invoice, which will be the first step to digitizing. Japan has adopted the PEPL framework, so watch this space. And finally, from an A&M perspective, we've got in Asia 500 tax consultants who can assist. We hire people who are senior in the Big Four or senior in industry, because we want those who have either led these projects or have operationalized the project with their clients to be able to assist our clients, right? So these are just some of the things to think about. Choose a trusted advisor. They're going to support you along the journey. Systems integration is key to success. It's not just tax. And then the training and support, because there's implementation and there's post-implementation that really drives success. So thank you very much. We've now crossed into your lunchtime, so thank you very much, and I'm more than happy to field any questions that there may be.
That was excellent, Andy. So one question has come in. The question that come in has been asked, what about e-invoicing timeline and I guess the possibility of it being delayed? That question's coming in. If you could just follow along with one from me. Will there be any penalties that apply to those who fail to implement it within those timelines?
Yeah, Martin, it's a really good question, and this comes up quite a lot, particularly in Malaysia, given how the tax regime has changed. First of all, I'll say there will be no delay. So from what we understand, there will be no delay. The 1st of August will go live. The IRBM will be soft on penalties for the first few months before those penalties are implemented. But the fact is, unless the Minister of Finance actually comes out and delays this whole thing, there will be no delay. That's what's key. Everyone should prepare for the 1st of August go live, followed by January and July, because it's all systems go. And linked to that, I mentioned that the IRBM will be softer on penalties, for the first few months for say mistakes or for late implementation. Those penalties range from cash, so 200 to I think 2,000 RMB per transaction, per issue, all the way to jail time. Now, that's not an expectation that all of a sudden people are going to go to jail as a result of making mistakes on their e-invoicing, but it demonstrates how key and vital this is to the overall digitization of Malaysia's tax regime. So some interesting thoughts there.
Interesting. Certainly seems to be an important part of the strategy. I just want to make sure that Catherine's question from earlier was answered as well. I think we covered this just after the residents, but just to make sure it was nailed off. Independent consultants, do they need to apply with the invoicing?
Pardon?
Sorry, we had a question earlier from Catherine, and I just want to make sure that we covered it off. She asked earlier, we were talking about non-profits. We also followed up with independent consultants. Do they need to comply with the e-invoicing regulations as well?
Yes. So if you're running a business, yes. And that will also depend on your revenue thresholds as to when you need to go live.
Thank you. Perfect. So as a final call to everyone enlisted, and thank you very much. Everybody has stayed with us for the 1 hour, 20 minutes, which is obviously means it's an interesting topic. Any final questions, please put them in the chat. And just while I'm waiting to see if any final questions come in, I'll remind you one more time about, if you're interested in the slides, the content from both Andy and Amar, and also how-to guides on becoming e-invoices compliant and what that's going to mean for your business, please click the download here button at the top of the screen, enter in your corporate email address, and we will send you all this information. I've been Martin Devine. Andy, thank you very much for joining us. And Amar, your slides were extremely detailed and informative. We are really pleased to have you, and we wish everybody well on the e-invoicing journey. Ling, finally, the slides, one more question that obviously I just came in here. Again, I just said this, the slides will be shared, and if you're interested in additional complimentary content, please click download here, top of the screen, enter in your details, and we will also have some additional guides, ebooks, academies that we will send to you that will hopefully set you well on your way to your compliance journey. Please, everyone, enjoy lunch, and thank you very much for your attendance, your participation, and your interest today. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.